The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Catherine Lawson clutched the eviction notice with trembling fingers, the cruel reality of her situation sinking deeper than the evening chill. It had been 3 months since influenza had taken her husband, James, and with him, all prospects of keeping their small homestead on the outskirts of San Elizario, Texas. All that remained of their dreams was Bessie, a stubborn brown and white spotted cow that stood chewing lazily in the yard, unaware that she represented Catherine's entire worldly fortune. The year was 1878, and the untamed territory of West Texas offered little mercy to a woman alone. At 26, Catherine had already lived a lifetime of hardship, leaving her girlhood in Missouri far behind. Her auburn hair, once the pride of her youth, was now hastily tucked beneath a worn bonnet, her green eyes dulled by grief and worry. "Just you and me now, Bessie," Catherine whispered, reaching out to stroke the cow's velvety nose. "Though what good you'll do us without land to keep you on, I haven't the faintest idea." The cow's large brown eyes blinked slowly, offering no solutions. The mortgage payment was due in 1 week, and Catherine had nothing to offer the bank but empty promises. The small vegetable garden had withered in the Texas heat. The well was running dry, and her sewing work barely brought in enough to keep food on her own plate. As darkness settled across the land, Catherine lit a single candle and sat at her kitchen table, trying to summon the courage that had once carried her across half a continent. Her thoughts wandered to the letter she had received from her sister in St. Louis, offering her a place to stay if she could manage the journey back east. The thought of returning defeated made her chest tighten with something between pride and despair. She was still sitting there, lost in thought, when a knock at the door startled her so badly that she nearly upset the candle. "Who calls at this hour?" she muttered, grabbing her husband's old shotgun from beside the door. It wasn't loaded, she had sold the shells for flour weeks ago, but an unescorted woman couldn't be too careful. "Who's there?" she called, her voice stronger than she felt. "Isaiah Armstrong, madam. Sorry for the late hour, but my wagon threw a wheel not half a mile back. Saw your light and thought to ask if I might water my horses at your well." Catherine hesitated, then cracked the door open, keeping the shotgun visible. The man standing on her porch removed his hat, revealing a shock of sandy brown hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He couldn't have been more than 30, with clear blue eyes that crinkled at the corners, suggesting he smiled often. "Your well, madam," he repeated, gesturing toward the small structure behind her house. "It's nearly dry," she replied, "but what's left you're welcome to. I'll fetch a lantern." As they walked to the well, the stranger's spurs jingled softly in the darkness. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn leather chaps, dusty boots, and a faded blue shirt that had seen better days. But there was something about the way he carried himself, a gentle confidence that didn't match the rough cowboys who occasionally passed through San Elizario. "You're a long way from town," Catherine remarked as she held the lantern while he drew water for his horses. "Heading north with seed and supplies," he explained. "Got a claim near the Picos, planning to try my hand at farming." He paused, looking around her property with an appraising eye. "This your place?" Catherine laughed bitterly before she could stop herself. "Not for much longer," she admitted, then wondered why she was sharing such personal matters with a stranger. Isaiah filled his canteen, then looked at her thoughtfully. "Pardon my asking, madam, but you seem to be in some trouble." Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the kindness in his voice, or simply that she hadn't spoken to another soul in days. But Catherine found herself telling this stranger everything about James's death, the failing homestead, the impending eviction, and Bessie, the cow who represented her only remaining asset. When she finished, they stood in silence, the Texas night alive with the sound of crickets and distant coyotes. "A cow's a fine thing to have," Isaiah finally said, "but not much use without land." He looked out over her property, the moonlight silvering the scrubby grass and stunted mesquite trees. "This is good land, though. With proper irrigation and the right crops it could yield plenty," Catherine sighed. "Perhaps for whoever buys it from the bank next month." Isaiah drummed his fingers against the well's stone rim. "I have seed," he said slowly. "Wheat, corn, even some vegetables that can withstand this heat, and I know farming." He turned to face her directly. "What if I were to help you? I've got experience, supplies, and strong arms." "You've got land at least for now and a cow that can provide milk and eventually calves." Catherine stared at him, bewildered. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're fighting to keep what's yours instead of running back east like so many do. I respect that." He gestured toward his distant wagon. "I was heading to unbroken land that would take years to tame. This place is already started. We could make a farm here, a real one that would feed you and pay that bank what's owed." "We," Catherine repeated, the word hanging between them in the night air. "A partnership," Isaiah explained. "I'll provide the seed and labor. You provide the land and that cow. We'll split whatever profit comes after the mortgage is paid." Catherine studied his face in the lantern light, looking for signs of deception. She found none, only open honesty and something else, a hint of loneliness that mirrored her own. "Mr. Armstrong, that's a generous offer, but I'm a widow woman living alone. People would talk." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right about that. Propriety matters, even out here." He considered for a moment. "I could set up my tent behind the barn, and we'd only meet in daylight in the open where any passerby could see there's nothing untoward." Catherine laughed despite herself. "Do you often make such impulsive proposals to strangers, Mr. Armstrong?" His smile was warm and genuine. "Never before, Mrs. Lawson, but I believe in making decisions when opportunities present themselves." He extended his hand. "What do you say? Shall we make a farm?" Catherine hesitated only briefly before taking his calloused hand in hers. "We shall try, Mr. Armstrong. We shall try." Dawn broke early the next morning, bathing the modest homestead in golden light. Catherine had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. Was she being foolish to trust a stranger? What choice did she have? By the time she dressed and stepped outside, Isaiah had already repaired his wagon wheel and moved his camp behind the barn, just as promised. He stood in her yard, surveying the land with a critical eye, his hat pushed back on his head. "Good morning, Mrs. Lawson," he called when he spotted her. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been walking your property. The soil's better than I expected." Catherine joined him, carrying a pot of coffee. "It was good once. James, my husband, he had plans to expand the garden, but then the drought came." Isaiah accepted a cup of coffee with a grateful nod. "Water's the key to everything out here." "Your well's low, but I noticed a creek bed about a quarter-mile east. It's dry now, but with the right damming and some clever ditch work, we could capture the runoff when the rains come." "If the rains come," Catherine corrected. "It's been mighty dry for 2 seasons." "They'll come," Isaiah said with such certainty that Catherine almost believed him. "In the meantime, we need to prepare. Today I'll plow what field we can manage with my horses. Tomorrow we can start planting." For the first time in months, Catherine felt a flicker of hope. "What can I do?" "That garden needs attention," Isaiah said, pointing to the withered plot near the house. "Some of those plants might revive with care, and your cow needs better grazing. If you could clear some of that brush along the south side, the grass there would grow better." They worked separately but in rhythm that day, Isaiah breaking ground with his plow while Catherine salvaged what she could of her garden. By midday, The Texas heat was oppressive, driving them both to seek shade. "You work hard for a town woman," Isaiah remarked as they shared a simple meal of cornbread and jerky under the porch overhang. "I wasn't always a town woman," Catherine replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "My father had a farm in Missouri before the war changed everything." "The war changed everything for a lot of folks," Isaiah agreed quietly. Something in his tone made Catherine study him more carefully. "Were you in the fighting, Mr. Armstrong?" He nodded slowly. "Confederate cavalry, young and foolish, fighting for a cause I didn't fully understand." His eyes took on a distant look. "Came west afterward, like many did. Seemed easier to start fresh where no one knew your past." Catherine understood that sentiment all too well. She had her own reasons for leaving Missouri, reasons that went beyond following a husband with dreams of Texas land. "Well, Mr. Armstrong, out here it's what a person does now that matters, not what came before." He smiled at that. "Call me Isaiah, please. If we're to be partners, all this Mr. Armstrong business seems overly formal." "Then you must call me Catherine," she replied, surprised at how naturally the words came. That evening, after Isaiah retired to his tent, Catherine sat on her porch watching the stars emerge. Bessie mooed softly from her pen, a comforting, familiar sound. For the first time since James's death, Catherine didn't feel completely alone. It was a dangerous feeling, hope always was, but she allowed herself to indulge in it, just for tonight. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Isaiah's wagon contained more than just seed. He had tools, irrigation pipes, even young fruit tree saplings carefully wrapped in damp burlap. "You were serious about farming," Catherine observed as he unloaded his supplies. "Always have been," he replied. "Tried ranching for a spell, but there's something about growing things from the earth that suits me better." They planted corn and wheat in the newly plowed field, carefully spacing the rows to make the most of the precious water they could provide. Catherine showed Isaiah her husband's half-finished irrigation system, a series of wooden troughs that would have carried water from the well to the fields if James had lived to complete it. "This is good work," Isaiah said, examining the craftsmanship. "With some modifications, we can make it work with the creek bed I found." Day after day, they fell into a comfortable routine. Isaiah would wake at dawn and begin the heavy work of clearing, plowing, and building. Catherine tended the garden, cared for Bessie, and prepared their meals. They always ate together, sharing stories of their lives before San Elizario. Catherine learned that Isaiah had wandered much of the western territories after the war, working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, mining in Colorado, and even spending a winter with a trapper in Wyoming. He spoke of these adventures matter-of-factly, without boasting, but his eyes lit up when he described the landscapes he'd seen. In turn, she told him about growing up in Missouri, her father's successful farm before the border raids took everything, and her brief happiness with James before illness claimed him. She didn't mention her brief marriage before James. Some secrets were still too painful to share. As the days passed, tiny green shoots began to appear in the fields, fragile promises reaching toward the sun. Catherine found herself watching for Isaiah each morning, enjoying the way he'd tip his hat to her as he approached the house for breakfast. His presence brought life back to the homestead, and she realized with some surprise to her heart as well, but the mortgage deadline loomed. 1 week before payment was due, Catherine rode into San Elizario to speak with Mr. Winters at the bank. The conversation went exactly as she'd feared. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lawson, but good intentions don't pay debts," the banker said, not unkindly. "Unless you can come up with at least half the payment by next Friday, I'll have no choice but to proceed with foreclosure." Catherine left the bank with a heavy heart. She hadn't told Isaiah how dire their financial situation truly was. The crops wouldn't yield anything to sell for months, and by then, it would be too late. When she returned to the homestead, she found Isaiah constructing a small dam across the creek bed, his shirt soaked with sweat as he positioned heavy stones. "How'd it go at the bank?" he called when he spotted her riding up. Catherine dismounted slowly. "Not well," she admitted. "We need half the payment by next week or we lose everything." Isaiah wiped his brow, leaving a smudge of dirt across his forehead. "How much?" $50, he whistled low. "That's a considerable sum." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What about your cow?" Catherine felt a stab of betrayal. "Bessie, you want me to sell Bessie?" "No," Isaiah said quickly. "But she's about to calve, isn't she? I noticed her condition yesterday." Catherine blinked in surprise. She'd been so busy with the garden and household tasks that she hadn't paid close attention to Bessie's expanding girth. "I thought she was just getting fat on the better grass," she admitted. Isaiah grinned. "That's part of it, but she's definitely carrying a calf. Must have been bred before your husband passed. A cow with a newborn calf is worth more than just a milk cow. If we can find a buyer for the calf, that might help with the payment." It wasn't a complete solution, but it was something. Catherine felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, just a little. "I'll go into town tomorrow and ask around about potential buyers." That night, as she prepared for bed, Catherine heard Bessie lowing uncomfortably. She grabbed a lantern and hurried to the barn, where she found the cow in the early stages of labor. "Isaiah," she called, forgetting propriety in her concern. "Bessie's calving." He emerged from his tent immediately, pulling on his shirt as he ran toward the barn. Together, they prepared a clean stall with fresh hay, moving Bessie inside where they could better assist her if needed. "Have you done this before?" Catherine asked nervously as Bessie pawed at the ground. "A few times," Isaiah replied. "Mostly with range cattle, not a milk cow. But the process is the same." They spent the night in the barn, taking turns watching Bessie while the other caught brief moments of sleep on a pile of hay. Near dawn, when the first hints of light began to filter through the barn's wooden slats, Bessie delivered a healthy bull calf with minimal complications. "He's a fine-looking boy," Isaiah said as the calf wobbled to his feet, searching for his mother's milk. "Strong, too." Catherine watched the newborn with wonder. "Another life on our farm," she murmured. Isaiah glanced at her, a soft expression crossing his face at her use of our farm, but he didn't comment on it. "We should let them bond. Come, I'll walk you back to the house." The morning air was cool and fresh as they crossed the yard, both exhausted but satisfied. At Catherine's door, Isaiah paused. "You should rest today," he said. "I can manage the chores." Catherine nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Isaiah, for everything." He tipped his hat and turned to go, but Catherine impulsively reached for his hand. "I mean it. Thank you for bringing hope back to this place." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and perhaps something more. For a heartbeat, Catherine thought he might step closer, but instead he gently squeezed her hand before releasing it. "Get some rest, Catherine," he said softly, then walked away toward his tent. Catherine watched him go, her hand still warm from his touch, her heart beating a strange new rhythm. The next day, Catherine rode into town with news of the bull calf, hoping to find a buyer. San Elizario was a small settlement, but it served as a trading post for ranchers and farmers throughout the region. The general store, saloon, and small church formed the heart of the community, with a scattering of homes and businesses radiating outward. She tied her horse outside Donovan's general store and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. "Mrs. Donovan," A plump woman with kind eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Catherine Lawson, as I live and breathe. We haven't seen you in town in an age." Catherine smiled. "I've been busy at the homestead, Mrs. Donovan. Actually, I'm looking for someone who might be interested in buying a bull calf. Bessie just delivered yesterday." Mrs. Donovan's eyebrows rose. "A bull calf, you say? Purebred, as far as I know. James bought Bessie from a cattle dealer passing through last year." "Well, you might want to talk to Preston over at the livery. He mentioned wanting to start a small herd. Or perhaps the Mendez family, they lost a bull to lightning last month." Catherine thanked her and was turning to leave when Mrs. Donovan called her back. "Catherine, there's something you should know." The older woman lowered her voice. "People are talking about that cowboy staying on your property." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Armstrong is helping me work the land. It's a business arrangement." Mrs. Donovan nodded sympathetically. "I'm sure it is, dear, but you know how people gossip. A widow alone with a strange man, it raises eyebrows." "He sleeps in a tent behind the barn," Catherine protested. "That may be, but perception matters, especially for a woman in your position." Mrs. Donovan patted her hand. "I'm only telling you because I care." Catherine left the store with mixed emotions. She found Preston at the livery stable and was relieved when he expressed immediate interest in the calf, offering $20 once it was weaned. It wasn't enough for the mortgage payment, but it was a start. As she mounted her horse to return home, she noticed a group of women outside the church, their heads bent together in conversation. When they spotted her, they quickly dispersed, their faces a mixture of pity and disapproval. The ride home gave Catherine plenty of time to think. Mrs. Donovan was right, her reputation in San Elizario mattered. If she lost standing in the community, it would make her already difficult situation worse. But the thought of asking Isaiah to leave made her stomach twist uncomfortably. When she returned to the homestead, she found Isaiah had been busy in her absence. He'd repaired the sagging porch steps, mended a broken window shutter, and even started constructing a proper fence around the vegetable garden. "To keep rabbits out," he explained when she commented on it. "How did it go in town?" "Preston will take the calf for $20 after weaning," she replied. "It's not enough, but it's something." Isaiah wiped his hands on his trousers. "I've been thinking about that. I have some money saved, not much, but perhaps enough to cover the rest of what we need." Catherine shook her head firmly. "No, Isaiah, you've already contributed more than enough with your labor and supplies. I won't take your savings too." "It's an investment, not charity," he argued. "In our farm." There it was again, our farm. The words both warmed and worried Catherine. She hesitated, then decided to broach the difficult subject. "There's something else. Mrs. Donovan mentioned that people in town are talking about our arrangement here." Isaiah's face grew serious. "I see." "It's not that I care what they think," Catherine said hastily, "but in a place like this, a woman's reputation is one of the few things she has." "You're right," Isaiah agreed, surprising her. "I hadn't considered how this might appear to others." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign he was thinking deeply. "There's only one proper solution I can think of if you're willing to hear it." Catherine nodded cautiously. "Marriage," Isaiah said simply. The word hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Catherine stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon, marriage," he repeated, more confidently now. "It would solve several problems at once. Your reputation would be secured. Our partnership would be formalized, and together we could build something lasting here." When she didn't respond immediately, he added, "I know it's sudden, and I'm not the husband you would have chosen in different circumstances, but I believe we could make a good life together." Catherine felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Isaiah, you can't be serious. We barely know each other. I know enough, he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. I know you're strong, determined, and kinder than you let on. I know you love this land and would do anything to keep it. And I know that in these past weeks, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever met. His sincerity was unmistakable, and Catherine found herself speechless. Part of her, a growing part, was drawn to this man who had brought so much life back to her world. But marriage, so soon after James. I need time to think, she finally managed. Isaiah nodded. Of course, it's not a decision to make lightly. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll continue with the fencing. You take all the time you need. As he walked away, Catherine felt both relief and a strange disappointment. She retreated to the house, her thoughts in turmoil. That evening they ate in awkward silence, the proposal hanging unacknowledged between them. After dinner, Isaiah excused himself earlier than usual, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts. She sat on the porch as night fell, watching as a distant storm painted lightning across the horizon. The land needed rain desperately. Their crops wouldn't survive much longer without it. Yet another worry to add to her growing list. Marriage to Isaiah would solve many problems, it was true. It would secure her standing in the community, provide for the farm's future, and ensure she wouldn't face the world alone. But marriage should be more than convenience. Shouldn't it? Catherine thought of James, their brief happiness together. They had married for love, ignoring practical concerns, and while she never regretted it, their union had left her in this precarious position. Perhaps there was wisdom in approaching marriage differently this time. And then, there was the undeniable fact that Isaiah Armstrong had begun to occupy her thoughts in ways that went beyond practical partnership. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gentle his hands were despite their strength, the sound of his deep voice as he spoke of his dreams for the land, these things had taken root in her heart without her permission. Dawn found her still awake, her decision made. She waited until Isaiah appeared for breakfast, his manner more reserved than usual. I've been thinking about your proposal, Catherine said as she poured his coffee. Isaiah set down his cup, giving her his full attention. And, before I answer, I need to know something. She met his gaze directly. Is this truly just a practical arrangement for you? Or is there more to it? For a long moment, Isaiah was silent. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. When I first suggested helping you, it was partly practical. Good land is hard to find and you needed help, but these weeks with you... He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. Catherine, I didn't expect to feel this way. I didn't come here looking for a wife. But I find myself looking forward to seeing you each morning, thinking of ways to make you smile, planning a future that has you in it. So no, it's not just practical for me. Not anymore. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. I was afraid you'd say that. Confusion crossed his face. Afraid. Because it makes my answer much more complicated. She squeezed his hand. Isaiah, I would be honored to be your wife, but not out of necessity or convenience. If we do this, we do it because we choose each other, not because circumstances forced our hands. The smile that broke across Isaiah's face was like sunrise after a long night. I choose you, Catherine Lawson. I choose you freely and with my whole heart. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 days later in the small white church in San Elizario, with Reverend Thomas officiating and Mrs. Donovan serving as witness. Catherine wore her best dress, a blue cotton frock that had seen better days but was still presentable. Isaiah had purchased a new shirt for the occasion and polished his boots until they gleamed. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Isaiah kissed her with a tenderness that made Catherine's heart flutter. There was no wedding feast, no celebration beyond a simple meal at the homestead, but neither of them seemed to mind. That evening, as twilight settled over their land, they stood together on the porch, Isaiah's arm around Catherine's waist. "Mrs. Armstrong," he said, testing the name. "How does it sound to you?" Catherine leaned against him, allowing herself to feel the solid strength of him. "Like a new beginning." They retired to the house together, husband and wife in truth as well as name. In the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Catherine found herself suddenly shy, despite having been married before. Isaiah sensed her nervousness and moved slowly, giving her time to grow comfortable with his presence. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured as he helped her with the buttons of her dress. Their first night together was a gentle discovery of each other, tender and unhurried. Isaiah proved to be as considerate a lover as he was a partner, attentive to Catherine's responses and patient with her hesitations. By the time they fell asleep in each other's arms, Catherine felt as though they had truly become one, their separate lives now inextricably entwined. The next morning brought a new dynamic to their routine. They worked as before, tending crops and animals, but now there were stolen kisses in the field, shared laughter over meals, and the profound comfort of falling asleep beside each other as night fell. With Isaiah's savings and the promise of Preston's money for the calf, they made the minimum payment required by the bank, buying themselves 3 more months to make the farm profitable. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it gave them breathing room. As summer progressed, the Texas heat grew more intense. The creek bed remained stubbornly dry, and their carefully planted crops began to show signs of stress. They rationed water from the well, prioritizing the vegetables that would yield the quickest harvest, but it was clear that without rain, they faced disaster. "We need that irrigation system working," Isaiah said one evening as they surveyed the withering corn. "I'm going to ride out tomorrow, follow the creek bed upstream. There must be water somewhere." The next day, Catherine watched anxiously as Isaiah rode out, knowing much depended on what he found. She busied herself with chores, trying not to worry, but by mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and Isaiah had not returned. When the first fat drops of rain began to fall, Catherine felt a surge of hope. She rushed to set out barrels to catch the precious water, then stood in the yard, face turned upward, letting the rain soak her clothes and hair. It was a glorious feeling after so many dry weeks. The rain quickly became a downpour, accompanied by thunder that made Bessie bellow nervously in the barn. Catherine had just finished securing the animals when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Isaiah appeared through the curtain of rain, his horse splashing through newly formed puddles. "You're soaked," Catherine called as he dismounted. "So are you," he laughed, pulling her into an embrace despite their dripping clothes. "Did you see the creek?" Catherine shook her head. "It's filling already. This rain, if it continues, will give us what we need. I found a natural pool upstream where we can dam the flow, create a reservoir for the dry times." His excitement was contagious, his eyes bright with possibilities. They stood in the rain, making plans, until a particularly loud crack of thunder sent them running for the house, laughing like children. Inside, they shed their wet clothes and dried each other by the fire, which led inevitably to lovemaking on the rug before the hearth, their bodies warm and alive with hope. The rain continued for 3 days, a blessing beyond measure. The creek swelled, the well replenished, and the crops revived as if by magic. Isaiah wasted no time implementing his irrigation plans, constructing a series of channels that would direct water from the creek to their fields. Catherine watched him work, marveling at his energy and determination. In the space of a few short months, this man had transformed not only her land but her life. Where there had been emptiness and despair, there was now purpose and joy. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Isaiah took her hand. "I've been thinking," he began, "about expanding." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Expanding? We've barely secured what we have." "The Johnston property to the east is for sale," he continued. 80 acres with good water rights and timber. If our first harvest yields what I think it will, we could make an offer." "Isaiah Armstrong," Catherine said with mock severity, "are you becoming ambitious?" He smiled, pulling her closer. "I want to build something that will last, something to pass on to our children someday." The mention of children caught Catherine by surprise. They hadn't discussed it, though it was a natural assumption for a married couple. The thought of bearing Isaiah's child filled her with a complex mixture of emotions: desire, fear, hope. "Children," she repeated softly. Isaiah studied her face. "Unless you don't want." "No," Catherine interrupted. "I do want children. With you." She hesitated, then added, "I was with child once before I met James. I lost it, and the doctor said I might have difficulty conceiving again." She had never told anyone this, not even James. It had been her private sorrow, carried alone. Now, sharing it with Isaiah felt like releasing a long-held breath. Isaiah's expression was tender as he gathered her in his arms. "Then we'll take what God gives us, be it children of our own or none. Either way, we'll have each other and this land we're building together." His acceptance, so complete and unquestioning, brought tears to Catherine's eyes. She had chosen well in this man, better perhaps than she deserved. As summer gave way to fall, their hard work began to show results. The corn stood tall, the wheat ripened to golden perfection, and the vegetable garden yielded enough to sell surplus at the weekly market in San Elizario. Bessie's calf grew strong, and Preston paid the promised $20 when it was weaned. Their financial situation remained precarious. Farming was never an easy path to wealth, but each week brought them closer to stability. Isaiah's expertise combined with Catherine's determination proved to be a powerful combination. In town, attitudes toward them had shifted. Where once there had been gossip and suspicion, there was now grudging respect. The Armstrongs were becoming known as hardworking, honest folk who paid their debts and helped neighbors in need. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Donovan pulled Catherine aside. "You're positively glowing, my dear," the older woman observed. "Marriage agrees with you." Catherine smiled. "It does, Mrs. Donovan. Isaiah is a good man." "Better than most realized," Mrs. Donovan agreed. "Though I always thought there was something special about him, even when he first arrived." A steadiness in his eyes. She patted Catherine's hand. "I'm happy for you, truly." As they rode home from church, Catherine shared the conversation with Isaiah. "So we've won over even Mrs. Donovan," he chuckled. "Next, the entire state of Texas will fall at our feet." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Catherine laughed. "We still have plenty of skeptics." "Let them be skeptical," Isaiah said, reaching across to take her hand as they rode side by side. "We know what we're building." That night, after they had retired to bed, Catherine lay awake listening to Isaiah's steady breathing beside her. 6 months ago, she had been alone, facing ruin with only a cow to her name. Now she had a thriving farm, a promising future, and a husband who loved her. The road ahead would not be easy. Farming in West Texas never was, but for the first time in years, Catherine felt equal to whatever challenges came their way. With Isaiah beside her, There seemed no limit to what they could accomplish. She placed a hand on her stomach, wondering if perhaps a child already grew within her. Whether it did or not, their family had begun the day Isaiah Armstrong arrived on her doorstep with seed and a promise to make a farm. As the harvest season approached, Catherine and Isaiah worked from dawn until dusk, determined to reap every possible benefit from their first crops. The corn stood tall and proud, the wheat field rippled like a golden sea in the Texas wind, and even the small orchard of fruit trees Isaiah had planted showed promising growth. Their hard work was paying off in tangible ways. The mortgage payment no longer loomed as an insurmountable obstacle, and they had even begun setting aside a small amount each week toward purchasing the neighboring Johnston property that Isaiah coveted. One crisp October morning, as Catherine helped Isaiah load their wagon with produce for the San Elizario market, she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the side of the wagon to steady herself, breathing deeply until the sensation passed. Isaiah was at her side immediately, concern etched across his features. "Are you all right?" "Just a spell of lightheadedness," Catherine assured him, though this wasn't the first time it had happened in recent weeks. "I stood up too quickly, that's all." Isaiah studied her face, unconvinced. "You're pale. Perhaps you should stay home today, rest. And miss market day." "Nonsense." Catherine straightened her bonnet determinedly. "These vegetables won't sell themselves and we need the money." Reluctantly, Isaiah helped her onto the wagon seat, but his worried glances continued throughout the journey into town. The market was busy when they arrived, farmers and ranchers from throughout the region displaying their goods while townspeople browsed the offerings. Catherine and Isaiah set up their modest stand, arranging tomatoes, peppers, and corn in neat, appealing rows. As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself having to sit down frequently, the dizziness returning whenever she stood for too long. During one such episode, Mrs. Donovan approached their stand, her keen eyes missing nothing. "Catherine Armstrong, you look like you're about to faint dead away," the older woman declared, placing a hand on Catherine's forehead. "Have you seen Dr. Parker?" "It's nothing, truly," Catherine protested. "Just tired from the harvest work." Mrs. Donovan exchanged a knowing look with Isaiah. "Men," she said with exasperation, "they never recognize the signs." To Catherine, she said more gently, "My dear, I've seen enough women in your condition to know what ails you. You're expecting." The word hung in the air like a revelation. Catherine's hand went instinctively to her stomach, a mixture of disbelief and hope flooding through her. Could it be true? After years of believing she might never carry a child to term. Isaiah's expression transformed from concern to wonder as the possibility took root. "A baby," he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make the blessing disappear. "I'm not certain," Catherine cautioned, not wanting either of them to be disappointed if Mrs. Donovan was wrong. "It's been only a few weeks of feeling this way." "Well, there's one way to be sure," Mrs. Donovan said practically. "Dr. Parker is in his office today. You should see him before heading back to your farm." An hour later, Catherine emerged from the doctor's office, her eyes shining with confirmed joy. Isaiah had been pacing outside, too nervous to sit still, and when he saw her face, he knew before she spoke. "We're going to have a child," Catherine announced, her voice trembling with emotion. Isaiah swept her into his arms, mindful of her condition but unable to contain his happiness. "A child," he repeated, his voice thick. "Our child." The ride home was filled with excited planning. The baby would arrive in late spring, after the worst of winter had passed, but before the intense summer heat. They would need to prepare a nursery, perhaps in the small room off their bedroom that currently served as storage. Isaiah began listing improvements needed around the homestead to make it safe for a child: fences to build, edges to round, a proper crib to construct. "Slow down," Catherine laughed, placing her hand over his. "We have months yet." But Isaiah's enthusiasm was irrepressible. "Everything changes now," he said, his eyes bright with purpose. "Everything we do for 3 instead of 2. That night, as they lay together in bed, Isaiah's hand rested gently on Catherine's still flat stomach, as if he could already feel the tiny life growing within. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed softly in the darkness. "After the war, I convinced myself I wasn't meant for family life, that wandering was my fate." Catherine covered his hand with hers. "What changed your mind?" Isaiah was quiet for a moment. "You did. This place did. For the first time since I was a boy, I found somewhere I wanted to stay, someone I wanted to build a life with." Catherine turned to face him, tracing the outline of his jaw in the moonlight that filtered through their window. "I thought my chance for happiness ended when James died. I was prepared to simply survive." She smiled. "Then you arrived with your seed and your impossible promise to make a farm." "Not so impossible after all," Isaiah murmured, pulling her closer. "No," Catherine agreed, nestling against him. "Not impossible at all." As winter approached, they prepared both the farm and their home for the coming child. Isaiah worked tirelessly, adding a second room to their small house, insulating the walls against the cold Texas winds, and building a sturdy crib from oak harvested on their land. Catherine sewed baby clothes from fabric purchased with their market earnings, each tiny garment a testament to her growing excitement. Her condition became more visible with each passing week, her body changing to accommodate the miracle they had created together. The community responded with typical frontier generosity. Mrs. Donovan organized a gathering of local women who presented Catherine with handmade quilts, knitted booties, and practical advice. Even Preston from the livery stable contributed, arriving one day with a beautifully crafted rocking horse for when the little one gets bigger. December brought colder weather, and the first Christmas that Catherine and Isaiah would celebrate as a family. They couldn't afford extravagant gifts, but each prepared a small surprise for the other. Catherine spent weeks secretly knitting Isaiah a warm scarf from wool she had traded for with a neighbor. Isaiah disappeared into his workshop for hours at a time, refusing to let Catherine see what he was creating. On Christmas morning, they exchanged their presents by the fire. Isaiah unwrapped the scarf with appreciation, immediately winding it around his neck despite the warmth of the house. "It's perfect," he declared. "Now I'll think of you even when we're apart in the fields." Catherine's gift was concealed beneath a cloth in the corner of the room. When Isaiah removed the covering, Catherine gasped in delight. It was a rocking chair, lovingly crafted from the same oak as the baby's crib, with intricate carvings along the arms and back. "For when you're nursing our child," Isaiah explained, helping her settle into it. "Every mother needs a proper place to rock her baby." Catherine ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears filling her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "The most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me." The new year of 1879 arrived with promise. Their fall harvest had yielded enough to secure their mortgage payments through the spring, and the winter wheat they had planted was doing well despite the colder temperatures. Catherine's pregnancy progressed without complications, much to their relief given her previous loss. In February, a week of unusually severe weather struck the region. Snow was rare in that part of Texas, but a bitter cold front brought freezing temperatures that threatened their livestock and winter crops. Isaiah worked around the clock, bringing the animals into the barn, covering sensitive plants with whatever materials they could spare, and keeping fires burning to prevent their water supply from freezing. Catherine helped as much as her condition allowed, worrying about the strain on Isaiah as he pushed himself to protect everything they had built. On the third night of the cold spell, Isaiah returned from checking the animals, his face gray with exhaustion. He collapsed into a chair by the fire, his hands trembling as he tried to warm them. "You need rest," Catherine insisted, bringing him hot coffee laced with honey. "You can't keep going like this." Isaiah shook his head stubbornly. "The north fence is damaged. If it isn't repaired, we could lose livestock if they wander too far." "It can wait until morning," Catherine argued. "You're no good to this farm if you work yourself to death." "Just a quick repair," Isaiah insisted, struggling to his feet. "An hour at most, then I'll rest." Before Catherine could protest further, he had donned his coat and headed back into the frigid night. An hour passed, then two. Catherine paced the floor, growing increasingly anxious. When the clock showed that Isaiah had been gone for nearly 3 hours, she wrapped herself in her warmest clothing, determined to find him. Outside, the cold took her breath away. The moon provided just enough light to see by as Catherine made her way toward the north pasture, calling Isaiah's name. There was no response, only the eerie silence of the frozen landscape. She found him near the damaged section of fence, slumped against a post. For one terrible moment, Catherine feared the worst, but then she saw the rise and fall of his chest. "Isaiah," she cried, kneeling beside him as best she could with her swollen belly. "Wake up!" His eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. "Catherine, what are you doing out here?" "Looking for you, you stubborn man," she replied, relief making her voice sharp. "Can you stand? We need to get you warm." Together, they managed to get Isaiah to his feet. The walk back to the house seemed endless, Isaiah leaning heavily on Catherine despite his murmured protests that she shouldn't be supporting his weight in her condition. Once inside, Catherine helped him out of his frozen clothes and into bed, piling every blanket they owned on top of him. His skin was alarmingly cold, his lips tinged with blue. "I'm going to make you hot tea," Catherine said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "And then we're going to have a serious discussion about your limits, Isaiah Armstrong." By morning, Isaiah's condition had improved, though he developed a cough that worried Catherine. For the next week, she insisted he remain indoors, nursing him with herbal remedies while she handled the essential farm chores herself. "This isn't right," Isaiah protested weakly from bed. "You shouldn't be doing the heavy work in your condition. And you shouldn't have nearly frozen to death trying to fix a fence in the middle of the night," Catherine countered. "We are partners, remember? That means we take care of each other." The cold spell finally broke, and with it, Isaiah's health improved. The experience had shaken both of them, a stark reminder of how precarious life on the frontier could be, and how dependent they had become on each other. As spring approached, bringing warmer weather and new growth to their land, Catherine's time drew near. Her body felt unwieldy, her movements slower and more deliberate as she carried the precious burden of their child. Isaiah took on more of the household duties, insisting that Catherine rest whenever possible. "You're hovering," she teased him one afternoon as he adjusted pillows behind her back for the third time. "I'm attending to my wife's comfort," he corrected with a smile. "There's a difference." Catherine caught his hand, her expression growing serious. "What if something goes wrong, out here so far from proper help?" Isaiah knelt beside her chair, meeting her eyes directly. "Nothing will go wrong, Mrs. Donovan has delivered more babies than I can count, and she's promised to come stay with us when your time is near. And if needed, I can ride for Dr. Parker faster than any man in the county." His confidence reassured her, as it always did. Whatever challenges came, they would face them together. In early April, on a day when the Texas wildflowers had transformed their land into a riot of color, Catherine felt the first contractions. Isaiah had ridden into town for supplies, leaving her alone when the pains began. She tried not to panic, reminding herself that first babies often took their time. She paced the house, breathing through each contraction as Mrs. Donovan had instructed her to do. When Isaiah returned 2 hours later, he found Catherine leaning against the kitchen table, her face contorted in pain. "The baby," she gasped. "It's coming." Isaiah moved with surprising calm, helping Catherine to their bed before rushing to saddle a fresh horse to fetch Mrs. Donovan. The older woman arrived within the hour, taking charge of the situation with brisk efficiency. "This child isn't waiting," she announced after examining Catherine. "Isaiah, fetch clean towels and as much hot water as you can manage. Catherine, you're doing beautifully." The labor progressed rapidly, more so than any of them had anticipated. Catherine gripped Isaiah's hand with crushing force as she worked to bring their child into the world, her courage in the face of pain humbling him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their bedroom, Catherine gave one final, tremendous push, and their son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to declare his place in it. "A boy," Mrs. Donovan announced, quickly cleaning and swaddling the infant. "And a fine one at that." She placed the tiny bundle in Catherine's arms. Isaiah sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the small, red face of his son, wonder and love etched across his features. "He's perfect," Catherine whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "Look what we made, Isaiah." Isaiah could only nod, overcome with emotion. He reached out a tentative finger which the baby immediately grasped with surprising strength. "What shall we call him?" Catherine asked. Isaiah considered for a moment. "James," he suggested quietly, "after the man who brought you to this land." "If that seems right to you." Catherine's eyes filled with tears at the generosity of the gesture. "James Isaiah Armstrong," she decided, "for both the men who helped build this farm." Mrs. Donovan discreetly busied herself with cleaning up, allowing the new family their private moment of connection. Outside, the Texas sky darkened to a deep purple, stars beginning to emerge like distant witnesses to the miracle that had occurred within the walls of the humble farmhouse. Little James thrived from the start, nursing vigorously and growing at a pace that amazed his parents. Isaiah proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son as he was handling a plow. He often carried James with him during his lighter chores, talking to the infant about the land, the animals, and the crops as if the baby understood every word. "He's creating a farmer," Catherine observed with amusement one evening as she watched Isaiah show James a handful of soil, explaining its properties with complete seriousness. "He should know his heritage," Isaiah replied. "This land will be his someday." The spring planting went well, with neighbors pitching in to help while Catherine recovered from childbirth. The community that had once gossiped about them now embraced the Armstrong family, recognizing in them the same pioneer spirit that had built San Elizario. By summer, their farm was flourishing. The irrigation system that Isaiah had designed captured enough water to keep their crops healthy even during dry spells. Bessie had been bred again and would calve in the fall, adding to their small but growing herd. The vegetable garden yielded more than they could use, allowing Catherine to preserve the excess for winter and sell the remainder at market. Their financial situation, once so desperate, had stabilized. The mortgage payments were made on time, and they had even begun negotiations for the Johnston property. offering a fair price that reflected both their ambition and their caution. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, James asleep in Catherine's arms, Isaiah brought up a subject that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about your sister in St. Louis," he said. "Have you written to her about James?" Catherine nodded. "I sent a letter last month." She replied with congratulations and an invitation for us to visit. Isaiah considered this. "Would you like to go? Now that the farm is stable, we could manage a trip in the fall after harvest." Catherine looked surprised. "You'd want to go east. I thought you preferred the frontier." "I prefer being with you and James," Isaiah said simply. "And I'd like to meet your family. Besides, there might be farming techniques in Missouri that could benefit us here." Always the farmer, Catherine thought with affection. "I'd like that," she admitted. "I haven't seen Eliza in years." They continued planning their journey as darkness fell, their voices low to avoid waking James. The life they had built together felt solid now, rooted in the Texas soil but branching outward with new possibilities. Later that night, after James had been settled in his crib and they had retired to bed, Catherine turned to Isaiah, her expression thoughtful. "You ever think about that first night you arrived here? How different everything might have been if your wagon hadn't broken a wheel near my property?" Isaiah pulled her closer. "I believe some things are meant to be, Catherine. I was searching for land to farm, and you had land that needed farming. You needed seed, and I had seed to plant. Perhaps it wasn't chance at all." Catherine rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "A widow with nothing but a cow to her name," she murmured, "and a cowboy with seed who promised to make a farm." "And look what we've grown," Isaiah replied, his voice soft with contentment. "Not just crops, but a family, a future." Outside their window, a gentle Texas breeze rustled through the fields they had planted together, crops reaching toward the star-filled sky. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Catherine and Isaiah Armstrong found the peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're meant to be, with exactly the right person by your side. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Armstrong farm. They weathered droughts that threatened their crops, illnesses that tested their strength, and market fluctuations that sometimes strained their finances. But through it all, the foundation they had built remained solid: their partnership, their love, and their determination to create something lasting from what had once been a desperate situation. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's sandy hair and his mother's green eyes. He took his first steps in the vegetable garden, spoke his first words to Bessie the cow, and by age 5 was insisting on helping with farm chores, trailing after Isaiah with single-minded determination. The Johnston property became theirs in 1881, expanding their farm to a respectable size that allowed for greater diversification. Isaiah experimented with new crops while Catherine developed a small but profitable side business selling preserved fruits and vegetables to merchants in El Paso. In the spring of 1882, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after her sister in St. Louis. Little Lizzie, as she was called, had a quieter temperament than her brother but showed early signs of the same resilience that characterized both her parents. By 1885, the Armstrong farm had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Their methods of irrigation and crop rotation were studied by neighbors seeking to improve their own yields. Isaiah was asked to serve on local agricultural committees, while Catherine's knowledge of food preservation made her a valued resource for other farm wives. Their journey from those first desperate days, a widow with only a cow, a cowboy with seed and a promise, had become something of a legend in San Elizario. New settlers were often told the story as an example of what could be accomplished with hard work and faith in the future. On warm summer evenings, Catherine and Isaiah still sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard that had once been barren. They would hold hands, sometimes speaking of the day's events, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence that comes with deep understanding. And always, they remained grateful for the broken wagon wheel that had brought a weary cowboy to the door of a desperate widow, beginning a partnership that would transform not only a plot of land, but two lives that might otherwise never have intersected. In the vast expanse of the Texas frontier, where so many stories ended in hardship and defeat, theirs was a testament to the power of shared purpose, unwavering determination, and a love that had grown as steadily as the crops they had planted together on what had truly become, against all odds, a farm to call their own.